They tell you that healing will make you softer, kinder, more at peace, and you believe them because that sounds beautiful. But Carl Jung discovered something that will shatter this illusion completely. A healed empath doesn't become a nicer version of themselves. They become dangerous, not to innocent people, but dangerous in a way that terrifies anyone who ever tried to use them. Let me show you what Jung called the most unexpected transformation in human psychology. When an empath finally integrates their shadow and crosses that threshold from wounded healer to psychological weapon, they don't just change, they become untouchable. And that's exactly what makes manipulators lose sleep at night. Before we dive into what a healed empath actually becomes, we need to understand what they were. The unhealed empath exists as what Jung called an emotional shock absorber, something designed to take impact after impact, cushioning everyone else from the force of life, while slowly destroying itself in the process. These individuals spent years absorbing everyone's emotional chaos. Your alcoholic father's rage, your mother's silent depression, your partner's infidelity that you could feel before you saw the evidence, your co-worker's jealousy masquerading as concern. You absorbed it all, not because you wanted to, because your nervous system was built to pick up every frequency within reach. Jung called this unconscious participation. You weren't just feeling your own emotions. You were carrying the entire unconscious weight of everyone around you. Their shadows, their denied pain, their unprocessed trauma, all of it poured into you like you were some kind of cosmic dumping ground for human suffering. And the worst part wasn't the pain itself. The worst part was that you thought this was your purpose. You believed that your sensitivity, your ability to feel everything, meant you were supposed to fix everyone, save everyone, hold space for everyone. You built your entire identity around being the person who could handle what others couldn't, the therapist friend, the emotional translator, the one who always understood. But here's what nobody told you. While you were busy absorbing everyone else's darkness, you were ignoring your own. You had no boundaries because boundaries felt cruel. You had no limits because limits felt selfish. You said yes when you meant no. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You stayed when every cell in your body begged you to run. And slowly, so slowly, you didn't even notice it happening, you disappeared. The real you, buried under layers and layers of other people's unprocessed emotions. Jung saw this pattern again and again in his practice. Empaths who came to him not because they were mentally ill, but because they were drowning in a sea of consciousness that wasn't even theirs. Consider a case profile that Jung documented in his clinical notes, a composite example based on patterns he observed across multiple patients. This individual, representing what Jung would categorize as the introverted intuitive type, walked into rooms and immediately sensed the psychological atmosphere. Who was lying? Who was in pain? Who harbored resentments? But this gift didn't bring peace. It brought exhaustion. They couldn't engage in small talk because they saw through every facade. They couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed around them. Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes too differentiated for normal social survival. This pattern repeats across the empath experience. The ability to see everything becomes the very thing that isolates you from everyone. But then something happens, something that changes everything. Jung called it the breaking point, but that term doesn't capture what actually occurs. It's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough disguised as destruction. Usually, it's a betrayal. Not just any betrayal. The kind that makes you finally see clearly. The person you trusted most, the one you protected with your life, the one you absorbed pain for, reveals themselves. Maybe you discover they've been lying for years. Maybe you watch them destroy you while smiling to your face. Maybe you realize they never saw you as a person at all, just a resource to be drained. And in that, moment, something inside you doesn't break, it awakens. Because here's what Jung discovered that will change how you see this transformation forever. That breaking point isn't when the empath loses their mind, it's when they finally start trusting it. You see, all those years you spent absorbing everyone's emotions, you were doing something else too. You were studying, cataloging, mapping human behavior with the precision of a master strategist. Every micro-expression, every vocal tone shift, every contradiction between someone's words and their energy. You saw it all. You knew it all. You just never used it. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of transformation that Jung observed repeatedly. The moment of awakening doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives as a cold clarity. The empath who spent decades doubting their perceptions suddenly stops doubting. The internal, knowing that they suppressed for years to keep the peace, becomes louder than any external voice trying to convince them otherwise. The healed empath emerges from this awakening as something Jung called psychologically complete. They've integrated their shadow, and their shadow isn't evil, it's every quality they were told to suppress. Their intelligence, their rage, their ability to say no, their willingness to let people fail, their capacity to walk away without explanation, their talent for seeing through manipulation in real time. When these aspects integrate, when the empath finally owns every part of themselves, three distinct stages unfold. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com, and each one is more powerful than the last. Stage 1. The mirror effect. The healed empath stops absorbing your emotions and starts reflecting them back to you. They're not a sponge anymore, they're a mirror. And not the kind that lies to make you feel better, the kind that shows you exactly what you are. Let's look at a narrative illustration of how this operates. Imagine you're a narcissist who spent years using empaths as emotional ATMs. You say something cruel, they absorb it. You project your insecurities, they take responsibility. This has always worked. But then you encounter a healed empath, and suddenly, nothing works. You try your usual tactics, the guilt trip, the gaslighting, the subtle put-down wrapped in concern, and instead of absorbing it like they used to, they just look at you, really look at you, and in that gaze, you see yourself, not the version you pretend to be, the real version, the insecure, desperate, manipulative version you've been hiding from yourself. It's terrifying, because the healed empath isn't judging you. They're not angry. They're just holding up a mirror, and you cannot stand what you see. So you do what all unconscious people do when faced with their own reflection. You attack the mirror. You call them cold, selfish, too sensitive, not the person they used to be. And they just smile, because they know exactly what you're doing. They've seen this pattern 1,000 times. They wrote the book on it. The mirror effect destroys manipulators because it removes their greatest weapon, your willingness to doubt your own perception. The healed empath trusts what they see completely, and that unshakable knowing is kryptonite to anyone trying to distort reality. Jung documented this phenomenon across his clinical observations. When empaths stopped second-guessing their intuition, they became immune to the very tactics that had controlled them for years. The gaslighters. Power evaporates when their target no longer questions their own reality. The guilt manipulator fails when their victim no longer feels obligated to carry shame that isn't theirs. Stage 2. Selective empathy. This is the stage that confuses people the most, because they expect the healed empath to either stay open to everyone or close off completely. But that's not what happens. What happens is they become the gatekeeper. The unhealed empath was an open door. Anyone could walk through, any emotion, any demand, any crisis. The door was always open because closing it felt wrong. But the healed empath transforms that door into something else entirely. A threshold with a guardian, and that guardian is ruthless with one thing: their energy. This is where selective empathy emerges. The healed empath is still capable of profound compassion, still capable of deep feeling, still capable of holding space for pain. But now, they choose. They choose who deserves access to their gifts. They choose which battles are worth their energy. They choose when to engage and when to walk away. And they make these choices without guilt, without explanation, without the need to justify themselves to anyone. To people who earn their trust, who show up with integrity, who respect boundaries, the healed empath is an oasis, safe, nurturing, deeply present. But to manipulators, energy vampires, and people who refuse to do their own inner work, the healed empath becomes a fortress, impenetrable, unmoved by tears that aren't genuine, unbothered by rage that's meant to control, unimpressed by sob stories designed to extract sympathy. This shift from nice to kind is crucial. Nice is about avoiding conflict, maintaining appearances, making others comfortable at your own expense. Kind is about doing what's actually helpful, even when it's uncomfortable. The healed empath stops being nice, but they become profoundly kind. Kind enough to let people face the consequences of their choices. Kind enough to refuse to enable dysfunction. Kind enough to say no without apology. And here's what makes this stage so powerful. The healed empath's selectivity isn't based on judgment. It's based on something far more sophisticated: pattern recognition. They've seen how certain personality types operate. They know the trajectory of relationships built on manipulation. They can predict outcomes because they've witnessed the same patterns unfold dozens of times before. The healed empath doesn't need 3 months to figure out if someone is genuine. They know within 3 conversations, not through mysticism, through data, through the unconscious database they've been building their entire life. Which brings us to stage 3, strategic omniscience. This is the stage that would terrify you if you understood what it really means, because the healed empath has a superpower that most people never develop. They became a human lie detector, not through some mystical gift, through survival. Think about what happens when you spend years in survival mode, when your emotional and physical safety depends on reading the room correctly, when missing a subtle shift in someone's tone could mean the difference between peace and chaos, when you had to become an expert in human behavior just to navigate your own home. Your brain doesn't just develop empathy, it develops a database. Jung observed this in his clinical practice again and again. His empath patients could predict behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy, not because they were fortune tellers, because they had spent decades unconsciously running pattern recognition software that would make artificial intelligence jealous. Every interaction was data. Every conversation was information. Every relationship was a case study in human nature. The unhealed empath collected all this data, but felt guilty about using it. They second-guessed their instincts, told themselves they were being judgmental when their gut screamed danger, overrode their internal warning systems because doing so seemed kinder, more understanding, more spiritual. But the healed empath trusts that database completely. When every cell in their body says this person is lying, they don't need evidence. They don't need proof. They already know, and they act accordingly. Every micro-expression that preceded an outburst, every vocal pattern that signaled deception, every behavioral sequence that ended in betrayal. You logged it all. And now, after integration, after the awakening, you have conscious access to that database. You see the game before it starts. Someone sits across from you with a smile, and within 30 seconds, you know they're lying about where they were last night. You know they're about to ask for money they won't pay back. You know they're setting up a manipulation 3 moves ahead. You don't know because you're psychic. You know because you've seen this exact pattern play out 100 times before. The micro-expressions never lie. The energy never lies. The behavioral sequences never lie. This is what Jung meant by differentiated perception. The healed empath doesn't just feel more than others. They process emotional and psychological information at a level most humans never reach. They're operating with a framework that took years of pain to develop, but now functions like a sixth sense. And here's the twist that makes this truly dangerous. The healed empath understands manipulation mechanics perfectly. They could manipulate you easier than the narcissist ever could. They know exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to exploit, which fears to activate. They have the blueprint. They have the skill. They have the knowledge. But they choose not to use it destructively. Jung spent years studying why some empaths integrated their power benevolently, while others turned it into a weapon. He found the difference came down to one thing: conscious choice. The healed empath who maintains their integrity makes a daily decision to use their gifts for good. They see the shortcuts. They know how easy it would be to manipulate their way through life. They recognize that their understanding of human psychology gives them unfair advantages in almost every interaction. But they refuse to take those advantages, not because they're weak, because they're strong enough to choose a harder path, strong enough to win without cheating, strong enough to influence without manipulating. This restraint, this conscious choice to be ethical when you could easily be effective through manipulation, is what Jung called moral courage. It's easy to be good when you lack the capacity for evil. It takes a completely different level of development to have the capacity for manipulation and choose truth instead. This is where Jung's concept of the individuated person comes in. The person who has integrated both light and shadow, who has the capacity for both profound compassion and ruthless precision, who can be gentle or fierce depending on what the situation requires. The healed empath becomes what Jordan Peterson calls a monster under control, someone capable of incredible damage who chooses benevolence. This choice, this conscious decision to use power wisely, is what separates the healed empath from the manipulator. Both see the game, both understand the mechanics, both could win at psychological chess. But the healed empath plays a different game entirely. They're not trying to control you. They're trying to protect their own peace, and that makes them infinitely more powerful than anyone trying to dominate. Because when you're not attached to controlling outcomes, when you're not invested in changing people who don't want to change, when you're completely comfortable walking away from anything that disturbs your peace, you become immune. Immune to guilt trips, immune to manipulation, immune to the chaos that used to pull you under. The manipulator needs you to react. The healed empath doesn't need anything from you, and that imbalance of need is where all the power lives. Now here's what happens next. The climax of this transformation, the moment when everyone around the healed empath has to make a choice, because the healed empath's new state of being creates a ripple effect that forces evolution or revelation in every relationship they have. Family dynamics that functioned through enabling suddenly collapse, not because the healed empath is destroying anything, but because they stop being the load-bearing wall that held up a dysfunctional structure. When you remove the person who always absorbed the tension, who always smoothed things over, who always sacrificed themselves to maintain fake peace, the whole system has to reorganize. And that reorganization is brutal for people who benefited from the dysfunction. Your alcoholic father can no longer drink himself into oblivion while you clean up the emotional wreckage. Your codependent mother can no longer use you as her therapist while refusing to get actual help. Your narcissistic ex can no longer control you through guilt about the past. Your energy vampire friend can no longer dump their perpetual crisis in your lap, expecting you to fix it. The empath who used to enable all of this is gone, and in their place stands someone who loves themselves more than they love keeping the peace. Some people step up. They look at the healed empath's transformation and feel inspired. They start doing their own inner work. They respect the new boundaries. They appreciate the authenticity. These relationships deepen and become more real than they ever were before. But others reveal their true nature. They escalate. They rage. They play victim. They recruit others to make the healed empath the problem. Because if the healed empath is the problem, they don't have to change. And this is where the healed empath's real power shows. They don't defend. They don't explain. They don't try to convince anyone of their worth. They just observe. They watch people reveal themselves through their reactions, and they make decisions accordingly. Not with anger, not with bitterness, with clarity. This is Jung's concept of conscious participation in action. The healed empath engages with reality as it is, not as they wish it were. They see people clearly, they accept people as they are, and they choose relationships based on that clear seeing. No more potential, no more hoping people will change, no more sacrificing for connections that drain rather than nourish. The healed empath becomes capable of profound love because they're no longer afraid of profound loss. They can let go of anyone who doesn't align with their truth, and that freedom makes them magnetic to healthy people and repulsive to toxic ones. Jung wrote extensively about this phenomenon. He called it psychological alchemy, the transformation of the wounded healer into the wise one, the person who descended into darkness, integrated what they found, and emerged with gifts that can help others heal through modeling what integration looks like. Because here's the final truth that Jung discovered. The healed empath's greatest gift isn't their ability to absorb pain. It's their living proof that integration is possible, that you can feel everything and still have boundaries, that you can see the worst in humanity and still choose compassion, that you can be powerful and peaceful at the same time. Your sensitivity was never a weakness. It was a weapon waiting to be forged. Every moment of pain, every betrayal, you were gathering data, building skills, developing the capabilities you needed to become psychologically untouchable. The goal was never to become less sensitive. It was to become consciously sensitive, to strategically take that empathic ability and combine it with wisdom and self-trust, to transform from an emotional shock absorber into a strategic force. This is what Jung called individuation, the transformative process of becoming whole, not perfect, not invulnerable, but complete. Someone who owns every part of themselves, the light and the shadow, the softness and the steel, the compassion and the capacity to cut ties without hesitation. You are not too much for this world. You're exactly what consciousness evolution requires. A person who can hold space for darkness without being consumed, who can love deeply without losing themselves, who can see through illusions while maintaining hope. The unhealed empath asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The healed empath knows. It happened to forge you into something extraordinary, someone who cannot be manipulated, cannot be guilt-tripped, cannot be pulled back into dysfunction. You were never meant to save everyone. You were meant to save yourself, and in doing so, become a template for integrated empathy, not martyrdom, not self-sacrifice, but conscious choice, strategic compassion, empathy with discernment. This is the transformation Jung documented, but most people misunderstand. They think healing means going back to who you were before the pain. But you can't go back. That version of you was unconscious. The healed version is far more powerful. You're conscious, awake, integrated, and that wholeness makes you dangerous, not to good people, but to anyone who mistakes your kindness for weakness, to anyone who thinks your empathy means you're easy to control, to anyone who believes they can use you. Those people are in for a rude awakening, because the healed empath doesn't argue, doesn't defend, doesn't prove. They just smile, see through the game, and make a choice. And that choice is usually to walk away so quietly you barely hear the door close. No drama, no explanation, just gone. This is what a healed empath actually becomes. Not nicer, not softer, not more accommodating. They become sovereign, self-possessed, unmovable in their knowing, unshakable in their boundaries, untouchable to anyone playing unconscious games. They become love with a backbone, compassion with discernment, empathy with self-respect. And that combination is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. The healed empath understands something that took years to learn, that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's sacred, that walking away from toxicity isn't giving up, it's leveling up, that choosing yourself isn't cruel, it's necessary. And when you finally make that choice, when you decide that your well-being matters more than other people's comfort, something shifts. The people who drained you start avoiding you. The situations that depleted you stop appearing. The drama that used to follow you everywhere suddenly can't find you anymore. Not because you're hiding, because you've changed frequencies. You're operating on a level where unconscious behavior can't reach you, where manipulation bounces off like water off stone, where guilt trips land in empty space because you're no longer standing where they used to hit. This is the true power of the healed empath. Not the ability to feel everything, but the wisdom to choose what deserves to be felt. Not the capacity to help everyone, but the discernment to invest in people doing their work. Not the gift of endless patience, but the strength to walk away when patience becomes enabling. If you recognize yourself in this journey, comment below, "I am awake." Let those words be your declaration, your acknowledgement that you've crossed the threshold from wounded to powerful, from unconscious to integrated, from victim to sovereign. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology and the transformation of consciousness. Because this channel exists for people like you, people who feel everything, who see everything, who are becoming everything they were meant to be. Your breaking point was your breakthrough. Your sensitivity is your superpower. Your empathy is your weapon. And now that you know how to wield it consciously, you're unstoppable. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.